and thank you for being here. I'm Steve Trent from Citi, delighted to be joined by Arhan, the CEO of Embraer Commercial, and Ron, the president of Azora, one of the premier global aircraft lessors. Thank you very much for joining, gentlemen. And this is probably best if it's interactive as possible, so please feel free to cut each other off. But maybe, Arhan, let me start with you. Airbus and Boeing announced further delivery delays. How would you say that these issues have any effect on your commercial aero business? And Embraer itself does a lot of aerostructures work in-house. And could you explain the advantages to that? And do you have any particular advantages on the engine side? And would you say that the engine side is actually one of the more vulnerable parts of the global supply chain?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Well, first of all, thank you for moderating. And Ron, thanks for joining us on the panel. And it's great to see so many people here interested in the session. Yeah, it's a great question. I think we all know the supply chain issues of the industry. Embraer is not prone to that either, so we do have our impacts. I think, and maybe Ron can talk about it a little bit later, is that the impact that we see on Embraer is a lot less than on the competitors. There's a couple of reasons for that. I think partly because we have verticalized more of our work. We still do a lot of the core business ourselves. We have that in control. What's also important, you mentioned the engines, which is, we have to be clear, that's been one of the challenges, is that there is a couple of reasons why the engines has a little bit less impact. I think we're very close to the supplier. We are very open with them on what we plan in terms of our OEM needs, because they also need parts for their MRO and for their spare build. I think we have a very close partnership with them. And the fact that the E2 is less affected, and I'm sure we can talk about that a little bit later, by the engine issues than the other programs with the GTF, that also helps us as an E2 program.
Great, terrific. And maybe one for you, Ron. So when you look at Azora's aircraft portfolio, have you seen any shift in demand among what type of equipment is being sought after? And can you provide a little more color how Boeing and Airbus throughput challenges have changed any of these dynamics vis-a-vis residual values or something along those lines?
Sure, thanks, Steve. First off, just to add to what Arjan said, I think we have aircraft from all manufacturers, and Embraer does a really good job of managing their supply chain. You're really kind of mitigating the risk of delivery delays to their customers for an airline. And obviously, getting aircraft on time is really important. It really just disrupts your operation. When we think of the E2, what we really like about the aircraft is it's the diversity. It's got many different missions. The deal we're very proud of, that we work closely with Arjan's team on, is the Scoot deal. Scoot's the low-cost arm of Singapore Airlines, a really great airline flag carrier out of Singapore, and they're using the aircraft to fly the aircraft differently. And we do think that the travel patterns have changed since COVID, and Scoot's taking advantage of that, where every day is a 3-day weekend. Airlines are using the aircraft to open up new markets. So Scoot's doing both of those things, where they're adding frequencies, they're opening up new markets. We see that trend kind of continuing around the world. And I think the E-Jet's ideally suited for that. We also like the E-Jets in the sense that aircraft with low trip costs and smaller aircraft do well during a downturn. Gordon Bethune used to say, he's worked for Continental, used to say, you don't go to business flying an airplane that's too small. So in a downturn, airlines keep the small aircraft flying, just to keep the operation going, to keep the frequency and connectivity going. Then at good times they use it to expand their route networks. We think that the E2, the small, we call them small narrow bodies, 150 seat aircraft are ideally suited for that.
Great, terrific. And maybe, Arjan, I'm going to jump back to you a second here. Regarding competition, what are your thoughts about long-term opportunities in China's domestic market? How do you see the opportunities to sell E2s in China? And maybe you can mention sort of what's going on more broadly in Asia. I saw that great video. You guys now have Scoot in Singapore. I believe you recently sold some planes in the Australasian theater.
Would love to get your view on what the panorama looks like in that market.
Yeah, great question. Well, on China, I think the benefit of the E2 family is that it is truly complementary to the Chinese product. So the Chinese have the AHJ21, which was redubbed as the 909 just before the weekend. And then the 919 as the bigger narrow body. And the 190 and the 195 E2 are two aircraft that fit nicely in the middle. The 190 E2 is a great aircraft for hot and high performance in China, so for the connection of the Tibetan Plateau, we believe it's a great aircraft. The 195 E2, as in the rest of the world, it's a great aircraft from a cost per trip and cost per seat perspective, as also mentioned in the video by the team from Porter. So we believe there's great opportunities there. If you look at the US and you look at Brazil, where the E2s are, or the E1s are really connecting the networks, we believe with the expansion that China shows in terms of airports, to really connect and improve the Chinese economy, it needs to connect the mainland, and we believe the E2 is a great aircraft to do just that. And maybe a little bit more on Asia. Of course, we're very proud that we're bringing more and more current E-jets into China, into Asia, and the E2 coming into Scoot. We really see that as a great showcase for other airlines. We notice that when we speak to other airlines, they're very aware of what Scoot's doing. It's a low-cost airline that is now embracing a smaller aircraft with very attractive seat costs to fly into smaller destinations. So we really feel that in Asia we're on the brink of bringing more E2s. We have several discussions going on, and I'm very hopeful going forward about the Asian market.
That one, oh, please go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I would just add to that, we're somewhat feeling with Aryan in terms of Asia, and you know, Scoot's a great example, right? A lot of airlines follow their lead, and we see a lot more demand for the aircraft in the area. We're actually opening up a Singapore office at Azora. We're a small but growing leasing company. We really believe in the Asian market, and the aircrafts, can really open up new markets, especially with the performance. You know, the Scoot aircraft are 190s. It's a great performing aircraft for challenging airports, and then when you add the 195 economics to it, I really see it as a nice complementary fit. So.
And local presence is key. So it's great to see that the Azora is opening the Singapore office. We have an office in Singapore, we have an office in Beijing, and we're also about to open an office in India. So getting localized people to do the sales is extremely important, and to do the support, of course.
No, great color. And I was actually going to ask about the Indian market as well. You guys opening an office there. Of course, China and India together are a massive cross-section of the human race. So intrigued to hear that you're having that connection over there. Great stuff. Ron, maybe I could jump to you again and just digging in a little bit more about what I was asking about residual values earlier. Your high-level view on Embraer's products, and what are you guys seeing on the E175 versus larger gauge equipment?
Yeah, so the residual value, it's interesting. I think there's a misnomer a bit that it's a regional aircraft. People equate it to like a CRJ 200 type thing, and what we see is quite different. If you look during the downturn, for example, like I said earlier, airlines during a downturn they fly the aircraft more. So if you look at utilization of the aircraft, it's being utilized heavily by the airlines, and as a result, the demand stays constant. Whereas bigger gauge aircraft, they fall off and they kind of come back to the same residual value point. But what we like about the smaller gauge aircraft, like the E-jets, is that they can hold their value even during a downturn, and then during the good times, they're used to augment the network. The 175 is a great aircraft. Obviously, when I was at United, we ordered a lot of aircraft. It really transformed airline networks. Again, Embraer's innovation, putting the big winglet on the aircraft, is a game changer. And you can see the demand is quite strong for that aircraft here. So I love to fly on it. When I was at United, we actually had some of our best CSAT scores, customer satisfaction scores, on the E-jets because of the configuration.
We saw that, especially during COVID, the biggest downturn ever, where the 175 aircraft were the ones that pulled the airlines out of the crisis, right? So it's just to strengthen the point.
No, great color, and I appreciate it. If I could jump back to, I'm going to jump back to Arhan. You in this case, I mentioned the engine side of the fence, as there's been just a tremendous focus, of course, with all the GTF problems and what have you. How close are you guys to the jet engine manufacturers in terms of supply and product development? It'd be great to hear.
Well, Roberto, our head of supply chain, is not here, but he could tell you how much time he's spending on working with them. We do that together. So we have a lot of engagement, especially with the engine manufacturers. And I think that's really key because we know we have an issue, but we also know we have to fix that together head on. There is a benefit that I mentioned earlier on the E2, and it's basically threefold. First of all, we were the last program that came to the market with the GTF. So the initial teething issues never made it on our engine because they were already fixed. The second topic is that our aircraft came to the market gradually. So in a number of years, we do have some engines that are being affected, but it's a lot lower number that needs to go back to the shop. So the impact on the MRO side is a lot less. And I think the third, and that's a very important point that we can't stress enough with our customers, is that the engine on the E2 is the same engine as on the A220. But the E2 is almost 9 tons lighter, it's 10% lighter as an aircraft in max takeoff weight configuration. So the wear and tear on that engine is a lot less, and that's what we're really seeing in operation. So the GTF terminology tends to bring a lot of problems to people's mind, but I think if you look on the E2, and especially engines that are coming out of the shop today, they're in a very good shape.
Oh, great color, Ron. Appreciate that. And I'm going to jump back to you, Ron. When we look at the Chinese market, some of your competitors are reducing their China exposure but adding to other parts of Asia. I was actually just overseas with one of your competitors mentioned this. How are you viewing opportunities geographically, and in which regions do Embraer aircraft have the biggest edge?
So I think we have a limited exposure in China. We have a couple of A330s there that we acquired through an acquisition of a company. But like Arjen said, I think it's a growing market. I think the aircraft's ideally suited for that part of the world. You see it with Virgin and Scoot and others. So for sure, I think we see that as a real growing market. For us, the backbone of the E-Jets is really Europe. The European airlines use their aircraft well to supplement their network. They're, I'd say, very focused on efficiency and environmental aspects, and that really lends itself well to the E2. What we like about the E-Jets is it's a very diverse aircraft. Low-cost airlines could use them. Flag carriers have them, and mainline aircraft have them too. So it's really used by all facets of the industry.
Oh, great color, Ron. Thank you. And back to you, Arjen. What areas of growth do you see for the E2? Do you think that the stumbles of larger OEMs can create E2 opportunities? And for the E1s, is this still primarily focused on U.S. replacement cycle? And are there good cargo or freighter opportunities for the E1? I know, and that great video Francisco put up, I saw some cargo information, but would love to just hear if you could expand on that.
Yeah, well, for the E2 market, we really see three different pockets of airlines. The first one is, of course, obviously the replacements of the current E-Jets. So all the 190s and the 195s that are flying out that need replacement, the E2 is really the best option for airlines because it's a very easy transition. They don't have to have to do it very quickly. They can take a long time to do that if needed. It's completely pilot common. I think that's why we love to have Azor on the program as a quote-unquote regional lessor. Although we like to call ourselves small narrow bodies, not regionals, but it's one market where we really see a lot of E2 demand over the next couple of years, and the E1's now getting to an age where that's becoming really relevant. The second very strong point that we see, and again we showed that in the video where we looked at the trip cost versus seat cost, is that there's a real paradigm shift from history where traditionally the smaller jets were cheaper per trip, but still quite a bit more expensive per seat. And the E2 has changed that. So the trip costs are 25-30% lower, but the seat costs are almost the same. So for airlines, it's now a great tool to complement their much bigger narrow bodies at very similar seat cost. And although there might be a small gap, and airlines always want to talk about the lowest cost per seat, but we always say, well, it's great to have low cost per seat, but if no one sits on that seat, it's still pure cost. Right? So with an E2, it's easier to fill, it's easier to reach the load factors, and I think airlines are starting to see that. And the third group is the low-cost area where we saw Scoot getting on board, where we have more discussions with airlines. I think there's another element coming into the mix that airlines are getting more and more aware of the threats of putting all your eggs in one basket. We had a lot of issues across the industry, unfortunately, that have shown that if you have everything in one basket, if something happens, your whole fleet is affected. So airlines are really starting to look at how can they spread their mix, how can they move to multi-OEM, and I think that's where a combination of narrow bodies as for low-cost operators to add a smaller aircraft type also makes a lot of sense. So those are the three pockets. We also have a lease base that is helping us to play across those fields. And on the E1 side, it was mentioned earlier that the 175 E1 is still a great aircraft for the US. We believe there's a tremendous market ahead of us. And the existing 190 and 195 aircraft, we've now certified the 190 freighter. The vast majority of 190, 195s are actually 190s out there in the market. And we believe that's a freighter that can perfectly fit between an ATR and a narrow-body freighter. So we believe there's a huge market. We have one converted aircraft at the moment. We're busy placing those. We have several customer discussions at the moment going on. But we believe there's a very bespoke market for each in freighter configuration.
If I could just add to Arjen's second bucket, it might be a bit in the weeds, but I think it's a good analogy when you think about an aircraft. You know, what Arjen said is really important in the sense that the E2, it's an all-new aircraft, right? You know, we like to say it's an all-new aircraft on a proven platform, the E1. But having an aircraft that's got a lower trip cost, a significantly lower trip cost, and a very similar cost per seat is what the 787 did to the 777 and the A380. You know, really transformed the airlines networks. When I worked at United, it was a game-changing aircraft when you think about the 87 compared to what it did to the current generation aircraft. And you see that with the E2, where the aircraft and the A220, they're both clean sheet designs. And it's really, you know, putting aircraft like the 700 and the A319 at a real competitive disadvantage. Of course, ownership cost is different for used aircraft, but it really transforms the networks. And you can see that the airlines realize that, and Scoots realize that they're clearly a market leader. They're using that aircraft to start their, you know, to really augment their network. And think about, you know, 15, 20 years ago when, you know, all the traffic flew through Kennedy. Now you can fly from, you know, London to Austin, Texas on a 787. We kind of see a similar analogy with the E-jets and the small narrow-body aircraft, because the economics are quite quite amazing.
That's why we stopped calling it regional aircraft, because 6-hour flights is nothing regional, right?
Oh, great color, really appreciate that. And Ron, I'm gonna jump back to you. When you think about opportunities for Azora's broad business, how do you think about leasing Embraer jets versus other commercial jets, leasing engines, leasing helicopters, you know, something along these lines? And you have entities such as Fortress Aviation digging deep now into the engine module segment. You know, do you see any opportunities for Azora to do something along those lines?
You know, we do. We try to be different at Azora in a sense that we have to distinguish ourselves or differentiate ourselves, I should say. And we actually, you know, Arjen and the Embraer team are quite good salesmen because we are customers for the E-jets. We have Phenoms in our fleet as well as we're one of the launch customers on Eve. You know, we think, again, trying to differentiate ourselves in terms of aircraft, you know, the E-jets really complement the airline fleets. We have, you know, Phenom aircraft that, you know, we can do quite well with. It's an amazing aircraft. It's a business segment that we want to kind of increase. And on the engine side, you know, we're a bit unique where we're actually acquiring CF34 engines and GTF engines to support our customer needs. You know, one constant feedback we hear right now from airline customers is they're concerned about the engines. So we acquired some engines from Pratt to support our customers. We're talking about doing like pooling type arrangements so we can really kind of support some of our smaller customers, because you can't obviously lease half an engine to an airline where we can actually pool engines. So, you know, we think, you know, being a full service provider, being creative and innovative, it's part of our core values, and we think providing engines is part of that. With respect to Fortress and FTAI, it's a very different business model, something we watch closely, but, you know, when we think about the CF34 engines, it's very similar to the CFM56 engine. In fact, they're equally reliable, but the modules are, you know, kind of more in tune, so we don't see as much of an opportunity like what FTAI has done. But of course, we're very impressed with their performance, and we keep an eye on them for sure.
And one of the key points that Azora does, you don't mention that, but you have actually some contract with engine manufacturers, right? So you are able to not only supply an aircraft, but also to supply engine leases with that, which is something that not many lessors are doing, which is quite innovative.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Arian. We do have a industry-leading contract with GE on the CF-34, and then we're the only lessor that has an FMP, a fleet management program with Pratt on our aircraft. We work closely with the Pratt team, trying to expand the customer base, just like we do with the Embraer team. But we think that's quite helpful to our customers, because if you're a smaller airline, it's quite difficult to get an FMP on a longer-term basis. So thanks for reminding me.
It is for Ron, in one of our main customers, you're involved in both the tools and its main competitor, which shall not be named. So when you think about the relative strength of the aircraft, their difference, how they fit into your fleet and your business strategy, how do you see the main differences between them? Thank you.
It's a great question, and when I ran fleet, it was actually a fairly fortunate position to be in, because both competitors make really good aircraft. We looked at the Neo versus the Max as an example. It really comes down to how does that aircraft integrate into your fleet. The overall deal, the economics, how you can use the aircraft. When we look at the A220 and the E2, we view them very similarly. They're both clean sheet designs. They both have their their pluses and minuses, and it's really up for the airline to decide which is the best and optimal aircraft for them. I do think with the large installed customer base of E1, there's a huge opportunity. There's more than 1,500 aircraft out there. The ease of transition is a huge benefit, especially when I was at United, being in a big airline, that transition is quite a benefit. But look, I think they're both great aircraft. I know I'm at an Embraer Investor Day, but we like them both. We let our airlines choose, and I think they're both clean sheet designs that really, like I said earlier, have game-changing economics. We can really kind of capitalize on that.
Thank you, Steve. Let me let you ask the last one.
Appreciate that, Guy. No, maybe I'm going to go back to Johan. I was really intrigued by what you said about the E175 and how extremely well it's done in the US market, considering any potential competing aircraft really gets screwed up on maximum takeoff weight limits. Do you see any potential over the next 20 years that we could see some kind of scope clause adjustments that could lead you to pivot in your product strategy?
Well, Steve, I'm glad you make that. Do I see anything in the next 20 years? Because that's far away. I think short term, I don't see a lot of changes coming. Historically, I think this is not the moment. What I would say is that the 175 E1, it's such an amazingly strong aircraft. It's basically causing its own need not to change the scope clause.
Yep.
Right? So that's what we've seen over the last couple of years. The E175 E1 was so good that the gap of the 175 E2, which had a smaller engine, which has a smaller gap in terms of fuel burn, it was not enough for airlines to say, okay, let's go through the hassle to change the scope clause to get the 175 E2. However, maybe going forward, there needs to be discussions around this, right? If we want to bring the world really to a more environmentally better place and we want to reduce the fuel burn per seat, then I think something needs to happen in that space. It can either change on the seat count or it can change on the max takeoff weight size. I think short term, no, but I think long term, I think we're going to have to see what's next to cover that base, because I really don't believe that with the size of the smaller segment in the US, that is a segment that the airlines can do without. You need to fly those destinations with smaller gear. The 50 seaters are now all disappearing. There's no new 50 seaters to the market, so I think the market will be depending on something between 80 and 100 seats for long term. And maybe 190 E2 could be something that could fit there, but this is me maybe wishfully looking into the future.
Great stuff, and it looks like we're just about out of time. Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for the time and insights this morning. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.